Welcome to the end of 2024. 2025 is upon us, and I hope this year was everything you could have hoped it would have been. I think the overwhelming sentiment that I've been feeling and hearing from people around me is that 2024 was hard. No other way to describe it. Just hard. It was hard. And sometimes it was good hard. Sometimes it was bad hard. Sometimes it felt like maybe there was no end in sight this year. And so maybe I'm feeling that way because of where I live, and we lived through a natural disaster this year. But actually, there are lots of natural disasters all over the place, and that was part of the astrology for this year and into next year. I'm going to try not to go on that tangent too early in the episode. I just want to say that 2024 was a Saturn year, and that is the major sentiment that I always hear from folks who are dealing with Saturn related things, any Saturn related thing, that the overall feeling is, why can't anything be easy? Why does everything have to be hard? And that was kind of the vibe of 2024, among lots of other things. So this is your episode for 2025, a high-level overview of the astrology of 2025. I do one of these every year when the Yogiscopes planner comes out. I've been doing them since 2021, so here we are. This is a high-level overview, and if you want a more in-depth overview, you can get the planner. I will put a link in the show notes for that because I don't actually even have the link set up. I just sent it to print. It's print on demand, so you can order it and get it shipped straight to you without having to, pay shipping for it to come to me and then pay shipping for it to come from me to you. Anyway, so you can order the planner. I'll put the link in the show notes. I just finished it and got it uploaded right before, 30 minutes before it was time for me to go live in the 100 Healers Circle to record the podcast episode. So before hitting record on the public podcast episode, which is what you're likely here listening to if you're on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, whatever, I was chatting about just like Mercury retrograde and all the, what can go wrong will. Mars being retrograde right now makes it really hard to make progress. Well, we're headed into 2025. 2025 is a Mars year. So 2025 will just be, in a nutshell, a very different vibe. I think it'll still demand a lot from us. I think it will require work and getting out there and getting into action a lot. That's the vibe of Mars. But I think, I guess I could just say it'll be different hard. So the main theme, if I could say there is one, of 2025, and we'll dive into it over the course of this episode, is out with the old and in with the new. All of the major karmic players are shifting this year. Saturn, Jupiter, Rahu, and Ketu. All of the four major karmic planets in Vedic astrology, and I guess I could say astrology in general, are shifting this year. So in this episode, we'll briefly talk about it, and of course we will talk more in depth about each one as we get closer. So 2025 is a transformative year on the horizon. It is also a year of cycle endings, which means new beginnings, right? So welcome to the Yogiscopes podcast. I'm your host, Rose Holbrook. I'm a Vedic sidereal astrologer and a yoga therapist. So what I do is I don't just tell you about the astrology. I think that can be kind of heady, kind of upper chakra imbalanced, kind of cerebral, not very actionable. So that's where the yoga therapy part comes in. And actually, so this episode, if this is your first time joining me, welcome. I'm super glad you're here. This episode's a little bit different because it's so long term. I'm not necessarily going to give you specific yoga practices or journal prompts. Actually, I would say the journal prompts for this episode are the 6 or 8 pages of worksheets that are in the Yogiscopes planner to help you look back over the past year and set your intentions for the next year. That's your journal prompts for this episode. But normally on any episode, I would give you some yoga practices and journal prompts, some very specific yoga practices for how to work with the energy. But this is such a broad overview. I guess I'll go ahead and say it now. I usually say it at the end. Your yoga practices for the year of 2025 is just to please have a yoga practice. Like whatever that looks like, I hope you have one. And if you want some inspiration along the way, please tune into the weekly episodes of the Yogiscopes podcast where I will be sharing those things. So let's dive in. With, I was mentioning it is a year of cycle endings and new beginnings. Let's start with the numerology. So there's several reasons I say that, but let's start with the numerology because that's where I started before. Is that, so 2020, this is straight from numerology. When I say 2024 was a Saturn year, 2025 is a Mars year. So 2024, when you add up 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 4, that equals 8, right? 2 plus 2 is 4, and 4 plus 4 is 8. So 8 in numerology and Vedic astrology is connected to Saturn. So that's why when I say it's a Saturn year. So when assessing like the whole vibe of the whole year, you'll want to know based on this numerology which planet rules the year. And so 9, which is, you can come to that by adding the digits of 2025, 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 5 is 9. That is connected to Mars. And so the way that numerology works also, FYI, is that you're always adding the digits until you get to a single digit. So 9 is the highest one that you can have, which means it's the end of the cycle. But when I say it's the end of the cycle, I mean that like we're going to be, like things are going to be coming to a head. Things are going to be sort of like culminating, right? And then they start over again at 1 the next year. It'll be a 1 year, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But so 9 being the end of a cycle, being ruled by Mars, the numerology of the year 2025, it just marks the end of some major cycles, and that requires action from us because Mars is the planet of action. Hopefully it, we don't see a lot of fighting, but Mars is the warrior planet. So that's in the cards as well. But then another major shift this year that leads to that sort of, ending cycle, the endings and new beginning cycle, is Saturn will be changing to Pisces, which is the final sign of the zodiac. So both of those things, being the final number in numerology, being the final sign of the zodiac, are this, like, when I say, I'm like trying to point out that it's specifically the ending part. It's like being on the precipice of the ending. And so this is a long-term thing. I'm not saying you're going to wake up on January 1st and everything in your life is going to come crashing down. It might. Things like that do happen. And so I was kind of talking about, I think I started to allude to this, like, because of where I live. I live in, if you didn't know this, I live in the Asheville, North Carolina area, and we had Hurricane Helene hit us this year. And so for a lot of folks, myself included in some ways, but I still have my house. So here I am sitting in my house, but I know people who lost their houses. And so for a lot of folks, it was like that day, September 27th, there was like no turning back from. And so I don't know that when I'm talking about the astrology of the year, it's not like you're going to wake up on January 1st and things are going to be different. But we're going to right now in this episode talk about the shifts that will happen during the year. And so with that, there are some periods that stand to be more transformative or more like when you go through them, that they are ripe for that kind of event where it's like those kind of turning points energy, right? And so we'll talk about them. Eclipse seasons always are one. In fact, so Hurricane Helene, the flood that we had here, happened right in the peak of eclipse season. So right on the day right between the two eclipses is when it sort of precipitated, and it culminated like at the second eclipse. And the last time we had a flood like that here in this area was also on an eclipse. And so we have eclipses every year, but we'll talk about these ones because they are, I guess, special, because Rahu and Ketu, the planets that are responsible for eclipses, are changing signs this year as well, which is another thing adding to that sort of like out with the old, in with the new vibe. So Rahu has been in Pisces, right? And so for a year and a half. And so maybe you remember way back at fall of 2023, I'm in the Northern Hemisphere. So it was like September, October of 2023 when I was talking about it. Before Rahu moved to Pisces and Ketu moved to Virgo, which is where our eclipses have been happening for the past, since then. I am almost positive I would have mentioned on one of those episodes talking about it that is already a sort of like ending vibe. And so this is all such slow stuff. I just want to stress that what I'm talking about is like slow moving things. And so when I'm talking about over the course of the whole year, I'm also talking about things that last for longer than a year. So when I'm talking about Saturn's moving this year and Rahu and Ketu are moving this year, well, they move basically every other year, Rahu and Ketu do, and Saturn moves every 2 to 3 years. So to have both of, or I guess all three of them moving this year is a pretty transformative time. Like for example, 2020 was a year where we had all of them moving. And then so Jupiter moves every year too. But guess what? Jupiter's moving 3 times this year because Jupiter is going to change signs like it always does. And then it's going to move through Gemini super fast, like in 6 months. Jupiter is going to move into Gemini in May, I want to say. I should have it written down. I do have it written down. In fact, I just spent like weeks working on this planner. But then the dates all kind of start to swirl around in my head. So yeah, Jupiter moves into Gemini in May, but then in October, so that's like not even 6 months later, Jupiter's going to move to Cancer, where he'll spend like a month and a half, because he'll go retrograde and, just within the first few degrees of Cancer and move back to Gemini again, all within 2025. So that's not typical that Jupiter will move 3 times. Usually Jupiter moves once every year. In 2025, Jupiter is moving 3 times. 3 times, y'all. It's going to move to Gemini, to Cancer, and then back to Gemini, all within like a 4 or 5 month period. And so it's just all of this shifting happening. And what I want to point out about that, if I haven't, I've been like kind of dancing around it already, is that when all of this shifting happens, it's ungrounding. And I was actually thinking of this as I was inputting all the weekly themes in the planner as I was making it, that there are some weeks of the year where nothing moves except the moon. The moon's always moving. There's a handful of weeks out of the year where nothing's moving. Not the sun, not Venus, not Mercury. There's not a new moon or a full moon, right? Like there's nothing really, like when I'm putting in the themes of the week, there's a few weeks out of the year where I'm like, nothing's really happening this week, And so those are the times, though, I want you to pay attention, especially if you get the planner and you're following along week by week. Those are the weeks where you will have time to integrate, which means you will have time to like feel the effects. And when everything's just in motion, and everything's changing, it's ungrounding. And so that's what I've been trying to get at with like, it's the ending, and it's like things will be ending. But what I'm trying to point out to you is that this is the ending part of the cycle, not the new beginning part of the cycle. And now, of course, as with any year, there will be new beginnings next year. I'm not saying everything's going to end and everything's going to be terrible. That's not what I'm trying to get at. Because we'll still have our normal, what you could call like the wheel of the year type stuff, where like, In the spring, Venus will be exalted, which happens every spring. Venus moves to Pisces. It's the spring here in the Northern Hemisphere. That really tracks with springtime. Venus being the planet of like beauty and luxury. And it's like we go from this like barren winter landscape to like there's all of a sudden pretty pink buds outside and everything's getting green and more lush. And that is a very like Venus exalted vibe. And so there will be a spring next year, right? There will be a summer, there will be a fall. Like we'll have all of those normal things, and the more, I guess I could say, like mundane things happening will still happen throughout the course of the year, and we can look forward to that stuff, and that's really nice. And that's never what I'm here to talk about on these like yearly outlook episodes. We'll talk more about those kind of things as we go, of course, because and actually I have this in my notes to talk about on this episode, is that like, for example, Venus is exalted in Pisces. Well, Saturn is moving to Pisces in March. March is also usually around the time Venus is moving through Pisces, around the time that it's like Pisces season, kind of like the end of March into April, under the sidereal zodiac that we use in Vedic astrology. But also Venus will retrograde in Pisces at that time in March, as will Mercury will also retrograde in Pisces in March. So we just have a lot of Pisces energy, and Venus will be in Pisces for like 3 or 4 months, which is not typical, but that's great because Venus is exalted in Pisces. So when I'm saying like it's a really larger cycle of sort of endings and not quite in the new beginning time yet, there are some things that point to new beginnings. And so I just want to point that out, that we're always in larger and smaller cycles of expansion and contraction. So I hope this makes sense. Let me give you an example. So the sun moves through its phases of expansion and contraction. And I've heard it argued before that the sun is this like masculine planet because it rises every day and it sets every day without fail, whereas the moon waxes and wanes. Well, guess what? The sun waxes and wanes too, because we're approaching the winter solstice, and there's going to be like, depending on where you are, but I think at the latitude where I live, like 8 or 9 hours of sunlight. And on the summer solstice, there's like 14 or 16 or something hours of sunlight. So the sun waxes and wanes too. And it's just not quite, it's like on a larger cycle. So that's what I'm getting at, is the moon waxes and wanes every month. We have a new moon, which is like no moon, and a full moon where the moon is its waxiest, if you will. And so that's a very short cycle of expansion and contraction. And you can explore this in your body with your breath and your heart rate. So if you exercise or you do like a maybe vigorous vinyasa practice, and you notice that your breath goes up, your heart rate goes up. And you can slow your breath down, but your heart rate's going to slow down shorter, or like more slowly. And so does that make sense? That there's always expansion and contraction cycles going on. Our heart rate is one, our breath is one, the moon phases are one, the amount of daylight we have, which is going to be impacted more by how close or how far you live from the equator, right? Like, so all these things are happening all the time. There's always expansion cycles, there's always contraction cycles. And so I'm not saying everything in 2025 will be an ending, but I am saying the larger undercurrent is contraction or endings, right? And that can be ungrounding. So I hope you ground yourself. And so that's related to Saturn moving to the last sign of the zodiac. That's related to it being a 9-year, and 9 is like the end of numerology. And there is another, I guess I could say, like larger cycle that we've been talking about within the 100 Healers Circle, sometimes in our like Q&A portion that we have after the live podcast recording. Somebody asked specifically about the year 2030, and this was like probably 2022 when they asked me that, or it might have been early 2023. They were like, what's up with the year 2030? And so I started diving into it, and I've been looking more and more into it as we've been getting closer. At that time, it was like 7 or 8 years away. Now it's like 5 years away. But basically, that put me on this like big, long research thing where, so for a lot of folks, just check if this feels true for you, that 2019 felt like the last normal year. And I know a lot of people's lives have changed in a lot of different ways since then, but that's a sentiment I've heard echoed from a lot of people, is that 2019 was the last year that felt normal. And then at the end of 2019 and into 2020, it's just like everything's been crazy and ungrounding ever since. And so that cycle that we're talking about kicked off with, and I don't have this in my notes and I'm going to get it wrong. I just know I will. I have it in a separate set of notes to talk about at another time, maybe especially as we get closer to 2027. But I want to say it was a Jupiter and Ketu conjunction in Sagittarius. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And so basically we're leading up to another Jupiter and Ketu conjunction in 2027. That will be this sort of like finally ending all of that karma that got unleashed on the world in 2020, which we all know. I do have it in my notes. Jupiter, Ketu, and Mars conjunction. So it was specifically the when Mars joined the mix that the whole world shut down, right? Because there was a pandemic in 2020. But in 2019 is when that Jupiter and Ketu conjunction started. And so we'll have another Jupiter and Ketu conjunction in 2027. But basically this Saturn cycle that we're starting this year will carry us through until then. So I just bring all that up to say, hopefully I didn't just lose you with all that jargon and like talking about different years and blah, blah, blah. But just to like sum that up, basically, this is like a 2-year cycle, 3-year cycle starting this year. And it's in the sign of Pisces is where it's starting, what you need to worry about for this year. So it's going to be all about just endings in your life, right? So we'll dive more into it as we go. And then the other thing I want to point out, so I've been talking about this Saturn and Rahu conjunction in Pisces. The last time it happened was 1968 to 1970. And so I detailed that on the podcast episode where I'm last fall at this point. It was fall of 2023, which was it was like September, October of 2023 when I put that podcast episode out about the last Saturn and Rahu conjunction in 1968 in Pisces, I should say, the last time they conjoined in Pisces specifically. And what we saw then was a lot of civil rights activism and progress and not so good things happening as well. And so maybe we'll see some of that in 2025. And so because we will have this Saturn and Rahu conjunction for from March 29th through May 18th. So we'll talk about that time period more as we get closer. And then what ends that is on that May 18th is when Rahu will move to Aquarius and Ketu will move to Leo. And so what we'll likely see with that, just in a quick oversimplification nutshell, is that we will be forced to care about the collective more and hopefully put our ego to the side, but also, and so this is like we've really been seeing this happen a lot in Western North Carolina, is that folks here are like really community minded and mutual aid has been good. But so Rahu in Aquarius and Ketu in Leo is a pretty like mutual aid vibe, I would say. And of course we'll talk about it more in its own episode as we get closer. But basically Aquarius is all about the collective and Leo is all about the self. And this axis is sort of about balancing the community and the collective and humanitarianism with like wanting to shine as an individual. And that's what we see with mutual aid, is where it's this like from each according to their ability to each according to their need kind of thing. And so hopefully we see that creep in more in after May 18th of 2025 when that shift happens. But what I want to say, and it's the same thing that I said with when Rahu was moving to Pisces, because I was like, Rahu in Pisces is going to give this, like, people are going to become obsessed with spirituality. Well, people don't turn to spirituality. This is just my experience. And I've been a yoga teacher for a long time. So spiritual teacher, right? And I didn't turn to it because my life was like hunky dory. Like, people don't just turn to spirituality because everything's great, right? People turn to spirituality because shit hits the fan, probably. And so that's the same thing with, like, I don't think, because we live in this like capitalistic society, people don't just like turn to mutual aid because they like want to. And so I will say, like, Western North Carolina was a pretty like community focused, like maybe more mutual aid driven place already before we had this natural disaster, but we became even more so like overnight after the natural disaster. And mutual, how it works really is from each according to their ability to each according to their need. Like, you show up and you do what you can. That's the Leo side, is like, what am I good at? What are my skills? What can I be useful for? And the Aquarius side is like, what do people need? Right? And so that's going to be the balance once Rahu and Ketu move there. And then after that, or actually right before they move, during eclipse season, we will have what is called a Kala Sarpa Yoga. So a Kala Sarpa Yoga means time serpent yoga. And so I was talking about eclipse seasons being times that seem kind of like portals, or like if you look back over your life and there's like events that's like, wow, that was really a turning point. There's a good chance that it happened during an eclipse season. But, so that's one. And there's eclipse seasons every year. These eclipses this year are just a little bit different because we have Rahu and Ketu moving this year. So we'll have like a sort of blend. Instead of them both being on the same axis, they're kind of shifting this year, it gets weird. It's a little different. But that's all I want to say about it. I don't want to get too in the weeds about that until we get closer. And I'll give you more as we go, nitty gritty of like how to actually work with those energies. But so that's eclipse season. That happens every year. And so if you can think about what the eclipse seasons have meant for you recently, the Kala Sarpa Yoga, it also has to do with Rahu and Ketu. So, yoga means union, right? Maybe you're familiar with that. That's like the direct translation of union. And so yogas in astrology, in Vedic astrology, and Jyotish are just combinations of planets, like specific combinations, and there's like thousands of them. But the Kala Sarpa Yoga is when all of the planets are what we call hemmed between Rahu and Ketu, meaning they're all on the same side of the sky. And so now I will give the caveat that Pluto will be in Capricorn, and the rest of the planets will be on the other side of, so the Kala Sarpa Yoga will start while Rahu and Ketu are still in Pisces and Virgo. And then it will continue as they move to Aquarius and Leo. And so basically, during this time, April 20th to July 22nd, the moon will break it a few times. And of course, I'll give you those dates as we get closer. I will do a whole thing about it. But what I want you to know right now is basically in that time, between April 20th and July 22nd, it will be a Kala Sarpa Yoga is like a time warp. It's time serpent yoga. So it's like, it feels like a time warp. It also feels like, one of those times where like who you were before versus who you are after are like not the same. right? One of those turning points, one of those inflection points. And so you'll want to know where those houses are on your chart. I will give you more resources as we get closer on how to figure that out. And just in general, that's why we're here paying attention to astrology, because we know these things are going to happen, but we want to be more intentional going into them so that we can kind of like a cat, like land on our feet, right? That's the goal. And it doesn't make us immune to the hard stuff or to the transformative times. It doesn't make our life always smooth and hunky-dory and we never experience any friction, but it does make us, the analogy I like is a rip current, right? All of these things that I'm talking about on the Yearly Outlook podcast are things that are more like rip currents of your life, not like the waves that are going in and out. That's the easy stuff, like the sun, Venus, Mercury, what they're doing. That's like the wheel of the year. The seasons are just going in and out. The moon cycles are just going in and out. They're just doing their thing, right? And then every once in a while comes this rip current, and it will take things sideways. It'll take them down the beach. And if you've ever seen a rip current or an undertow, they're sometimes called, from the beach, you can see the waves like separate, and there will be a section that's just dragging out to the ocean. So if you get caught in one of those, you're just swimming along, right? Floating around in the ocean of your life, which is also, we have all this Pisces energy I've been telling you. So this is a really good analogy for 2025. You're just floating around in the ocean of your life, and all of a sudden you hit a rip current and you can't go that direction anymore, because if you try to go that direction, the current's just going to take you out to sea, right? And you're going to lose sight of the shore, and you're just going to be adrift, and it's dangerous. And so your options when you encounter a rip current are to try to fight it and wear yourself out, to try to swim against it, right? And you'll get tired. You're never going to be more powerful than water, so don't try. Or to become dead weight, and just also it still will let you carry it out to sea, right? To just not do anything, and you're still going to get carried out to sea. Or you can learn how to swim in a rip current. And if you grew up, like I grew up in North Carolina, so we grew up taking day trips to the beach. I live in the mountains of North Carolina now, but I grew up about an hour and a half from the beach, so I could just take day trips. And so it was like drilled into our brains from tiny that if you feel like the water is fighting against you, they didn't even explain it. They were like, this is an undertow. Like if you feel like the water is fighting against you and you can't swim the direction you're trying to swim, then you swim parallel to the shore instead of trying to swim into shore, because that's what, if you get caught in a rip current, it's trying to take you out to sea. And so you can't swim the direction you were trying to go anymore. You have to go perpendicular to it. And so it's like we were taught from growing up how to get out of a rip current. And that's the thing though, is like if you didn't grow up near a beach at all, like there's a lot of landlocked states and whatever places not near an ocean, you might have never been taught that, but people that have grown up near an ocean are taught that. And so I bring that up because that is the Saturn and Pisces energy. That is the Kala Sarpa Yoga energy. It's going to feel like you're in a rip current, and the way you were trying to go before, if you keep trying to go that way, you can notice that it's gotten incredibly hard, and either keep just, banging your head against that wall and trying to swim against it until you're just absolutely, utterly exhausted and you collapse and you get drug out to sea. Or you can be like, oh, well, what's the use? And you can collapse and also get drug out to sea. Or you can look at the facts and just go a little bit downstream, a little bit over there, right? And so that's the vibe of 2025. If I could say there was like a way to be throughout the year, is to just notice, especially in that Kala Sarpa Yoga, is just notice. This is me teaching you about the rip current. It's coming. April 20th to July 22nd is the period in which the Kala Sarpa Yoga will be sort of iterating, right? And so that takes time. That's like 3 months, right? April, May, June, July. Yeah, that's 3 months. That's a couple days over 3 months long. That's a quarter of the year. And so it's not like you're going to wake up on April 20th and everything's going to be different. Or you might, like I was saying a lot of folks in Western North Carolina woke up on September 27th and everything was different. But here we are 2 months later, and some folk, business closures are rolling in, right? Like, people were trying to make it and ended up deciding they're going to go a different direction, basically. And so you might have something like that happen in your life, in that time, April 20th to July 22nd, during that Kala Sarpa Yoga. And so, yeah, so that's some of the major karmic shifts. I also want to point out that, I'm like, anything that I guess I should talk about Mars, because I did say that it's a Mars year. So we're going into the year with Mars debilitated. It's debilitated right now. And so this is something I was kind of saying, before I hit record, just in the sort of like green room within the 100 Healers Circle, before I hit record on the public podcast, was that with Mars debilitated, Mars is in Cancer, Mars is retrograde in Cancer right now, and we're starting the year of 2025 with Mars, starting a Mars year with Mars debilitated and retrograde. And so we'll start out the year with it feeling like it's hard to get anything done, hard to just kind of like cross that finish line, hard to have vitality maybe, confidence, maybe tending towards like aggressiveness or passive aggressiveness rather than good assertiveness. Those are some of the vibes towards the beginning of the year. But towards the end of the year, Mars will be pretty closely tracking the sun. And what that means is that Mars will be conjunct a lot of the new moons towards the end of the year. And that will be really auspicious for like more new beginning type energy. So just stick with it. See how things kind of shake out over that middle part of the year with the Kala Sarpa Yoga. And just get your planner and follow along with me as we go throughout the year. And yeah, I guess my riptide analogy was like the best one I had to give you. And so for your yoga practices and journal prompts for this episode are get the planner and do the journal prompts in there. There's like 6 or 8 pages of them. And then just, I pray that you have a yoga practice at all this year, something that works well for you. If you want to join me in the 100 Healers Circle, I'm uploading new practices for the current astrology, super gentle, every week, every Monday, Manifest Moon Day, we call it. So please remember to keep your feet on the ground, your head in the stars, and stay in the light. Until next time, take such good care of yourself.